Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being patient with us. Sorry we're a couple minutes late, but we are so excited to be joining you today with a couple of guests to talk about all things legacy and legacy planning. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. Here today, we have a couple of great guests. We have Nat Robinson, founder and CEO of Trustworthy. We also have Heather Nickerson, CEO and co-founder of Artifacts. We have Jill Cicerelli of Cicerelli Advisory Services, and then I am Taylor Hiskey of Trustworthy. I'll be your kind of guide through today's presentation and talking to our wonderful guests about today's topic. Just a quick introduction to one of our guests here. I'll let Jill introduce herself as well, but we're super excited to have Jill with us. Jill comes with an extensive background in as a financial advisor and life coach. And we are really excited to have her as part of this topic. And I'll turn it over to her to give herself a little bit of an introduction.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. This is such an important conversation. I'm thrilled to be a part of it. Cicerelli Advisory Services, we do comprehensive wealth management around the United States. We've been doing that for 45 plus years, and our specialty is working with families. Literally what we do when we work with clients, they come into us and we help them organize initially. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. But through that organization stage, we start to uncover maybe I's that weren't dotted or T's that weren't crossed for one reason or another in their planning. And then the real exciting stage is to clarify and really document and prioritize what their most important values are. Because at that point, money is a tool to help them enhance their legacies and help them share those either with family members or the community, whatever is most important to them.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jill. Well, today's webinar is going to be centered around a pretty hefty conversation. And so we have a couple of questions that I think are going to be really impactful and to allow for Nat, Heather, and Jill to answer and kind of share their perspective around building and protecting legacy. So with that, we're going to cover a couple of different topics, right? We're going to talk about what does legacy actually mean? Because legacy can mean a couple different things for all of us, depending on if you're keeping documents safe and ready for when you're ultimately when you pass away and for your family, or you're pulling together some of your most precious heirlooms and wanting to keep those safe as well. So there's a lot of different ways in which we can talk about legacy. We're going to talk about tools that we can use, both practical tools and ideas as well, and then steps that we can take to protect that legacy. Really, at the end of the day, we wanted this to allow for real answers to real questions, things that we've heard from our members as well as members from Artifacts. So really excited for this conversation, and hopefully we will have some really good information for you today. So with that, first things first. Why does legacy matter beyond finances? And Jill, I'm going to start with you for this question.
Thank you, Taylor. I think legacy, like you said, means a lot of different things. But when we really talk about passing on legacies, there's a lot of intangibles, not only tangibles. People think of assets, how do I pass along the assets without taxes to my family in the best possible manner? But when it comes down to it, what really is important to people is how to share their intangible legacies, the stories that have developed within the families, how maybe mom and dad met. Why is it so important that they have their grandchildren go and get an education? So talking about their values and their stories, because what happens is, especially for clients, like ages 50 and up, we're kind of half paper and half computer. So a lot of our stories are in our head and aren't documented in the right way. So what happens with people that can pass along those very important legacies, they go on through generations. If they're not documented in a way, pretty much after the first generation, they're gone and they're missed. And the great grandchildren don't get to really hear what grandma and grandpa, what was important in their life. So I think passing on those intangibles are kind of that elevated level once you have figured out how to organize all your financials.
Yeah, that's great. I couldn't agree more. Nat, what do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I would mirror what Jill's saying, but I think this encapsulated for me is the money runs out, but meaning endures, right? The meaning behind your life, your legacy, your intent is what you want to endure and have carried forward. The values, the story Jill mentioned, the stories, and that impact that we leave behind. And these things shape, the way that we live, shape the way our loved ones live their lives, and how we're remembered. So, I agree with everything Jill's saying, and it's really about meaning and intent. Where do you want that to go next?
Heather, I mean, I think you at Artifacts know a lot about meaning behind things. So what are your thoughts?
Thank you so much, Taylor. And it's great to be with Jill and Nat this afternoon or this morning, depending where you're joining us from. When we think about legacy at Artifacts, there's everything Jill and Nat said 100%. The other thing we think about is how do we ensure that it does? If you've spent time creating this legacy, how do we ensure that it is on, that it is? We have a saying that you might have, but were they listening? Was that next generation down? Was the second generation down really listening to what you said? So for us, it's not just the what, like what is the legacy, but it's also really important to know, like, how is it transmitted? Are you an oral storyteller? Are you someone who likes to prefer to write? Are you someone who has Bill was alluding to parts of it, everything on all those I's and dotted and T's crossed? But what about the softer side? How do you ensure that piece matters? How do you ensure that piece is remembered? So for us, it's not just the what is it, but then how do you transmit it so it is memorable and it is lasting? And that's where I think it really does. It matters a lot when you think in totality. How do you preserve your legacy?
Yeah,
I think your story, Heather, talking about that, I'm sure most of us or many of us have been in a position where we've had a loved one pass away and we're organizing their stuff. And we have no idea what the meaning is behind them. I love your stories that you tell about, your mom and finding things and not really knowing what they are. Is it junk? Do we give it away? Is there meaning? Is there a story behind it? So what I love about what you're doing is being able to document those things ahead of time. And I can't tell you how much that helps families. The last thing you want to do is worry about those things because already you're going through an emotional challenge. And that's what's so great about what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Jill. Taylor, I'd jump in as quickly share the story. I think it might even help to highlight like how important the documentation and knowing where things are, like with Trustworthy, and then the other side with the Artifacts piece. But for those who don't know, my mother passed away over 8 years ago. And we thought she was really well prepared. She had an estate plan, right? Like that's fabulous. That's better prepared than the majority of Americans are. When we got to page 23 in that estate plan, all tangible assets were meant to be divided equally among myself and my brothers. And being the eldest and only girl, my brother said, good luck with that. Don't toss out anything important and send us a check when you're done. And my pain point became a year plus in trying to figure out where everything was. So to this day, but Nat knows this, like had my mother had Trustworthy, it would have made my job 100 times easier trying to track down different documents. Where is the deed? Where is, even things like the electric bill? things like that you take for granted, but when you're the one in charge of closing out an estate, those are really important pieces. So you want to leave a legacy and not a mess. So we discovered very quickly that she had dotted the I's and crossed the T's on the financial side. She had a robust estate plan. All the accounts were accounted for. It was the smaller stuff. And not knowing where it was a huge pain point. And the flip side of that, was I got through kind of the bills and the legal stuff, was then what do I do with the expensive? What mattered to her? She was our family, everything in her head. And I didn't know if a crystal vase was, that I should keep, or was it a gift from Mildred? Be horrified that I kept it. So I didn't know. And I think that's the big piece when you're thinking about creating a lasting legacy. Take time to document what things are, where things are. Trustworthy is an amazing resource for that. We use that in our family. Just because I don't ever want to have to repeat what happened with my mother.
Heather, I'm curious to know how long it took you to transition your mother's estate in totality from beginning to end. Because I've heard, I've met people at conferences. Oh, it took me 7-8 years to transition my parents' estate.
The legal answer is just over 2 years, but I'll be honest, there's still stuff like heirlooms, mementos, things that I don't know that are mysteries. I still have old photos that I feel active trying to figure out who is in this photo. And I love my aunts, but they're totally helpless because they're so much younger. They don't know. So I would say legally 2 years, but the reality is I'm still going through items, trying to figure out what they are and why they matter to my mother. But I will say this is one of the reasons, not to make this a sales pitch, but when I first met Nat and learned about Trustworthy, we signed up the next week just because I never want my kids to be trying to figure out where is some of this stuff? Because that alone took almost a year to figure out oh my gosh, there's an account here it wasn't a big enough account to be mentioned in the estate plan or mentioned in kind of the list of things to do. But we discovered in the kind of those local, sometimes local shops or local areas, there's stuff you just don't know until you get that notice in the mail, sometimes 6 months, a year later, saying, by the way, you have an outstanding balance of $73.81. So it's Nat's nodding his head. I mean, I'm sure you hear this a lot, but that
we hear it. Yeah, we hear this all the time. And I think the average is 18 months, but everyone says, yeah, at least for the legal components, sure, 18 months, but everything else much, much longer. And unfortunately, everyone goes through kind of the same process after the fact, right? Opening the mail, trying to find the utilities and bills and all the other extraneous things that probably weren't documented that well. And then trying to hack passwords. You try and guess the passwords of all the things, and creating a spreadsheet and trying to share that among siblings. Right? We see a very similar process. Yeah.
And I think this is a great segue into our next question, actually, which is, what are the biggest mistakes families make when planning or not planning their legacy? And I think you bring up a great point. It's I think there's an underestimation of the time that it takes on the other end, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to make that investment somewhere. You can make it at the end, or you can make it today, or get started today. And choose your course, I guess. I think this is related to the biggest mistake that we see is just people simply waiting too long. And I'll give a tangible example. My 86-year-old mother lives in New Zealand. I got to see her over the summer, and she's like, I think I waited too long. I don't have the energy to go through all the stuff. And she's like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to deal with it because I don't have the energy to go through the garage and get rid of all the stuff that we've collected over the years. And fortunately, she has documented her paperwork in Trustworthy, and actually some of the memory items in artifacts, like her dresses, her jewelry. It's amazing. All the stories behind them. When she has such great memories attached to those items, right? That she still holds on to, even though she might not wear them or use them. It's about the moment in time that she got it, what was happening in her life, who was around her, what job she had, all of the things attached to the items that, Heather can speak more to, but really it's just waiting too long. People tend to wait like, oh, something's happened. There's been a crisis. There's been an emergency. There's been an earthquake or a fire or a flood. Okay, now we need to get organized, but it's too late. And we're so happy when people come to us and say, we were organized before this event happened. We were a trustworthy member. We had some other system that we used. And that meant that the recovery was so much faster because we didn't have to deal with the paperwork side of things. We had backups. And so I think people assume that cloud storage is good enough. Quite often they lack structure and security and accessibility for family members in those particular moments, right? That you want to have that access to your loved ones really dialed in before the crisis. And people just aren't able or don't designate the right people to have access in the moments that they need them. Of course, we help avoid all of these pitfalls, but those are really the big ones that we see is like, oh, I wish we'd had this before the tornado, is literally words that came out of a new member's mouth, right? They lost everything in the tornado and just was, I feel so bad for people in those moments. We could have helped. I wish you'd known about us before.
Yeah, or I wish we had this when my mother passed away.
Absolutely.
I think that's so important, Nat. When we are working with our clients, most people think when I get older, I should start documenting, because, okay, maybe I only have a 5-year, 10-year window left, but so much happens during life. All these what if things happen, and it happens at any age. We've seen it at age 30, where somebody is incapable to do anything for a year because they're in the hospital. They can't sign documents. They can't do this. So important, because when you don't use a trustworthy and you organize those things, it's almost like asking your neighbor to come in and figure out where everything is. So it's almost impossible. And like you said, the time delay that it takes as you're trying to make crucial decisions are really tough. But the other thing too is that most of our clients, their kids are all over the world. And they're not going to rush to their house and go through their files or try to figure out what prescriptions they're taking or who are their important doctors. How do we start communicating? How do we step up and make healthcare decisions for mom and dad? So with Trustworthy, when you can organize those things, and I know we're going to talk about that next step, then it's how do you communicate? How do you have those talks ahead of time before you no longer can, before you don't have the ability to do it? So that's so great, Nat, that you're helping so many people.
Hey, Taylor, can I jump in with a couple of mistakes that we see, and some I've actually lived through myself, but I'm going to highlight 2. So one I'm going to say is location. Like location. That's the whole adage in real estate. I think the same is true for estate planning and when you start thinking about your legacy. So Nat mentioned earlier, if you don't, you may think everything's okay because it's digital. But what about the passwords? Where are they? Even where are the accounts? Knowing the location of what you're dealing with. Where are the accounts? Where are the documents? And then also the physical location, which if things aren't digital, where is that deed? Where is the title to the car? You can't go sell your loved one's car if they passed away until you find that title. So location is critical. And the same is true with when you think about keepsakes and heirlooms and other items. I'll share a funny story. I was convinced my mother had a couple pieces of jewelry, and I went on a wild goose chase, probably for a couple of months, turning everything inside out, trying to look for these pieces of jewelry. I found other things, never found those pieces of jewelry. She must have, I don't know if she sold them. Maybe they were in getting repaired. I have no idea. But that's for location. I think if you're able to just note, especially for, again, the important files, where things are, cloud or physical, and then for the really important stuff, again, do you even still have it? Where is it? And then the second part of that is what's supposed to happen next? I think that's a really big piece. When you go through the whole estate planning process, oftentimes when you get done, you get this beautiful binder. Everything is legally I's dotted, T's crossed. And then they hand you typically a spreadsheet, or they hand you a couple of pages with blank lines on it. They fill in your tangible assets. What do you want next to happen to your items? And most people leave it blank. you think you've done the hard stuff, like you'll get to that later. Like Nat said, his mums, like you'll get to it later. Like that's, it's not pressing, it's not important. But the thing is, when later comes and your loved ones are staring at maybe it's a garage full or an attic full or a basement full of stuff and trying to wonder, they're trying to grieve. And yet they now have to make decisions. Like you literally can't, it's an elephant in the room. You can't snap your fingers and have it disappear, or it doesn't magically sort into piles of keep, donate, sell. So I think that's a really key part is what do you want to happen next? Because when you think about legacy, it doesn't stop with you, right? Like what happens next to the accounts, to the documents, to the items?
With that, Heather, I think one of the biggest mistakes, and you kind of mentioned it, was that people, if they feel like they're organized and they say they're organized, what happens is the information is stale after a couple of years. It could be paperwork, it could be estate planning, it could be duplicate documents, could be old real estate deeds. So that is one of the biggest issues we have as we help families go through the settlement process. What really is pertinent and what isn't? So the great thing about Trustworthy is that as you start to document these things digitally, it's pretty easy, once a year, maybe you can talk about that, Nat, to clean up those files and make sure that everything is current so that we don't have to spend time saying, geez, was that an investment they still have? Well, now we got to call somebody and we're on hold for 3 days and nobody returns our call. I mean, it's a lot of work. And the other thing too that I think people have to realize is that even if they're working with a team of professionals, those professionals retire. They move on. They're not always with the family. So you have to organize in a way that anybody can step in and help you understand what's happening.
Yeah, it's actually a core component of the reason we built Trustworthy. We realized, or especially around the legal documents, when people got them, that there were all kinds of pitfalls. Heather, you started talking about some of them, that they didn't sign them, that they didn't fund the trusts if there was a trust, and of course that they didn't keep them up to date as assets got bought and sold. Things changed. People had arguments in the family and fell out or fell in and became heirs. That there were all kinds of dynamics that happened over the life of those documents. And we realized that wasn't just the legal documents, it was every aspect of the family operating system, if you like. And so we created a set of reminders around all of those things to make sure that you stay on top of things and to make sure that you avoid those kinds of pitfalls, but especially things where if you're not on top of things, that there are late fees and penalties and overages, which is a crazy big number now. Last year, the number was almost $1,300. The average American family is paying almost $1,300, and like cost to your credit, all of those insipid fees that creep in. That's a scary big number, and you can imagine with inflation, it's only going up this year. So that's a core component of why we built it, is help you keep everything up to date as you go.
And Nat, I haven't even had a chance to tell you this yet, but we had a huge Trustworthy save in our household just the other day. We're getting ready to move a piece of art to a different state. And we got our Trustworthy reminder because the policy on that specific piece of art was about to expire. And both my husband and I were like, oh my gosh, we totally forgot about this. And it was about 2 days before the move. So we actually ended up calling our insurance agent and said, hey, FYI, we need to renew. We're actually going to be like putting it in a different state, which of course then, there's minutia of changing the policy. But it was, how do we not get on that reminder? I think with everything else we were focusing on, we probably would have moved the art and been like, it's done, and not thought twice about it. And meanwhile, it could have very well, the policy would have been invalidated because we transported it to a different state. So it was a huge Trustworthy win, and we got a good laugh out of it. So thank you, Nat and team.
Yay. Love to hear those kinds of stories. If you're not careful, Heather, you're going to end up on a Trustworthy billboard pretty soon.
Don't joke about that. It could happen.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we hear most often too, which I think will bring us to our next question, is like, I don't even know where to start. Like, where do I begin? And I think that the thing that begins is the conversations, right? I mean, I know personally having the conversations with my mother and my family around how do we begin to settle and how do we begin to build this this legacy is a lot, because I discovered things that I really hadn't intended to plan for when having this conversation. So I think turning it over to you guys, how can families start these conversations? And Heather, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Taylor. So at Artifacts, we get asked this all the time. So we developed over the years a series of checklists, and they're fun, right? But they're meant to tackle, again, like the stuff, the heirlooms, the keepsakes, there's different topics from infamous firsts to collections to old photos, you name it. They're free, downloadable. But we made them so that you can literally print off a checklist next time you go, visit your parents, your grandparents. Maybe you're having everyone over for Thanksgiving. It's a great way to get the family involved and start asking, like, hey, what was the story behind this photo? Or, hey, what was, your favorite travel memento? But it's a benign way to start talking about kind of some of those key. I mean, you start with the memories and the stories, but it very quickly leads to the tangible assets and what happens next. Like, where are they? What do you want to happen next to them? And it's a very gentle way of leading into, I think, a much larger conversation that involves kind of the estate planning, the documentation, all of that. But we've taken a really fun approach just because we know sometimes it can be hard to, sit down, like, pass the turkey. By the way, do you have a will? That may be a difficult conversation to start. So we took a different approach by kind of literally breaking it down bit by bit around some really fun themes and really prodding people to think, like, what is this? Why do I have it? What does it matter? What happens next to it? And we found that people they're always eager to talk about their stuff. So it's a very gentle beginning to a much larger conversation.
That's amazing. We'll have to share that checklist with everyone after the webinar. Hopefully that we can do that. That would be great. Jill, what about you? I think there's so much when it comes to the financial aspect of this, right?
Yes. Well, first of all, Heather, I love that idea of taking an item and sharing a story. What a great way to start a family meeting. I love it. But I think people somewhat hold back from communicating for a lot of different reasons. One, they don't know how to or how to start. Two, they think they have to divulge all of their information. And what if the kids see what our net worth is? And what if they don't have incentive or they know they're going to get it? What if my oldest daughter knows that I named our youngest son in our documents? She might be hurt about that. So there's all kinds of reasons why families don't communicate. But I would say that the value of communication is so much greater and deeper than those obstacles. And it does help to have some people like yourselves to talk through that process. We always say for families, let's start with simple things, and you don't necessarily have to actually talk about how much you have or what your assets are. And a great way to start is those estate planning documents. I don't know how many families have never discussed what is important as an example of with their healthcare. Like, if you had to step up for me and make my healthcare decisions, what is important? What do I think is good health? Where do I want to be? What kind of care do I want to have? Those conversations are really important, and families tend not to talk about those things. I think the other thing too is kids don't want to talk about their parents dying. Nobody wants to talk about anybody dying, but most of the things that happen where families have to step up are actually during their lifetime, not necessarily at death. So I think sharing those things, the other side value to that, and Taylor, you kind of brought this up, as we bring families together and talk very simply about documents, what they are, who's named, what does that mean? All of a sudden the kids say, well, shouldn't I have them too? I have children. Shouldn't I have a health care and a durable power? So it's really a fantastic conversation, because you end up sharing that with your kids and then them doing some planning that maybe they don't have.
Jill, that's exactly what we did with our younger children. we, as they turned 18, ensured each one has the medical directives. They have kind of their like basic legal documents in place, power of attorney. And then we took the opportunity to tell them, and in case you're wondering, for us. So it was a great way to, we didn't wait for them to ask, but we were very proactive. They kind of know now when they turn 18 in our family, you're getting an appointment with the attorney and you're getting all these things done. But it's also a really good way because it goes both ways. It's not just when you're aging and old. I think that's a misconception. It's really when you turn 18, at least in the US, like that's when you've got to start thinking about, especially the legal side, but at any age, legacy, it spans, 16 to 97. I didn't mean to jump.
It's fantastic, Heather.
No, I fully agree. I feel like one of the things I've learned is that you can never start too early. And not only because of being here at Trustworthy, but ultimately, I started a family this year. There's so many things that are happening right now in my life that I feel like if I don't start planning for the eventual future now, it's just going to catch up to me. And so starting to plan in this moment allows for me to know, like, hey, I can add a collaborator into my Trustworthy account, and that will allow me to open up the conversation of, I've added you into this space because this is important to me for you to have access to. And I think that's another way, at least for me, where the conversation starter actually comes from using the technology that I have at my fingertips. So it's great. It never starting too early.
Yeah, it's a key area you just said is you don't have to share everything, because you get overwhelmed when you're like, oh my gosh, where do I start? Just start with the little bits and pieces. And with Trustworthy, you can decide what you want to share, which is fantastic.
Yes. Well, and I think that actually brings us to our last question here for this conversation. But so how do tools and systems make legacy planning less overwhelming? Obviously, there's two tools here that we can talk about. But Jill, I think I'm going to look to you first in that. How have tools and systems helped you in working with the clients that you have?
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned a lot of those things already, but it's really being organized in a format that whoever is stepping up can actually step in, and within a couple of hours with maybe the financial team or what have you, they can understand what's going on. So I think the organization and the communication that you guys offer is an amazing tool. I can't tell you again how much time is lost with people not communicating. We just had a young lady, just as an example, she was in her late 30s. Her father was in his late 50s, had several businesses, was in Florida, she's in Tennessee, and he dies of a heart attack. She had to jump in and figure out not only how to run the businesses, like could she keep them running, but guess what? His checking accounts and all that were not funded to trust. She couldn't step up on them. They were all frozen. She couldn't even get at any cash. So, I mean, these are all the things that these tools provide in the sense of not only once you organize, you'll be able to see once things are kind of laid out, what hasn't been done. What kind of steps need to happen in order for things to move on seamlessly if somebody has to step up on my behalf? And that's kind of what you think about. If I'm not here to do this, and again, it's not necessarily death, it could be disability, short or long term. How does somebody step up and continue to manage that for me? And we could go on and on about that, but even paying bills, and like you said, Heather, knowing where the electric bill is and who's paying it. We've had insurance policies lapse because kids didn't know their parents had it. And, $2 million of death benefit is gone because it lapsed and the kids never even knew it. So, the tools are just amazing in the sense of how they help families.
The horror stories we all have, I'm sure. Thank you, Jill. Yeah, I think that you, like I said, the tools have allowed for me to be able to have great conversations. And I'm going to actually turn it to Heather first to talk a little bit about artifacts, and then we'll talk a little bit about Trustworthy, and then we'll get into questions after that. But Heather, I wanted to share a quick story with you. It made me think about it when you were talking about your mother. My grandmother was an artist. And I think that there's so her art wasn't necessarily stuff that we could sell, right? But it's so important to us to document what art pieces are what, when did she create it, when did she paint it, and so we've started to use artifacts to do that documentation now after the fact, after she's passed away, because it is important to do those things. And so I just wanted to share that little story with you because I thought it was important. But I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about artifacts.
Awesome. Thank you, Taylor. And I love that you're taking the time to document those stories. It's for the next generation, right? Your family is growing and you now have that next generation who's going to want to know, like, tell me more about, grandmom or great grandmom. I love that. So before I dive into artifacts, I also want to just big picture, how do tools and technology help? I want to just note, I think they give you a lot of structure. If you think back to, say before you had the tools and technology, sitting down with a pad of paper and a pen or pencil and being like, all right, well, now what? Like, how do I organize this? What am I even supposed to write down? Talk about writer's block. I think that when you have the right tools, the right technology, you not only know where to start, it gives you either prompts or questions, or it gives you fields to fill in. You can save and go back to it. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. So I think it takes a lot of pressure off doing everything all at once and ensuring it's absolutely perfect. Like that, I think this is the beauty of some of the technology involved. I think both Artifacts and Trustworthy and others out there really let you do it on your own time and give you the guardrails of what's really needed. So having said that, I'm going to jump into Artifacts. So we are, for those that don't know, we are a patented technology platform, so web and app. And the whole purpose is really to help you tell your story and build your legacy object by object. One of our core features is that if you're like, sentimental is not for me, that's great. We've got a lot of practical features. One of them is called In the Future. And again, you've got a drop-down menu to choose what happens to it next. Donate, sell, bequeath, keep in the family, or even too late, enjoy the memory. Save your heirs from a wild goose chase trying to find something that does not exist. And then, of course, depending what you choose, you can fill in more information. Click the button, you can share it in with your estate planner, attorney, insurance. You can even link it into Trustworthy. So there's a lot of ways you can incorporate kind of what you want to happen to all of your stuff, and ensuring that the story and the memory is passed down along with the item. How it works, really easy. Choose your object. That's usually the hardest part of what do I choose first, which is why we have all those different checklists. Take a photo, you can add video and audio. You can then add the story. And this, I think, goes back to that bigger point, right? When we say add a story, it could be 5 words. My mother gave me this. It could be, in the case of these earrings you're seeing, like I've got a 5-paragraph story for that, and it's laugh out loud funny. But you can add to it over time. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. And then you can, save and you're done. If you want to share, fabulous. Again, one click, share with family, share with friends, insurance, estate planner, you name it. But you don't have to share. We also have QR codes that allow you to link the physical item with the digital. So for instance, in my jewelry collection, every item has a QR code. If I got hit by a bus tomorrow, my daughter could go through my jewelry box and scan each QR code and get the story, and also what happens next to the pieces, which, no surprise, go to her. But there's practicality and functionality, and the whole point is really to get you, one, to think about what items do you actually own that really matter, and then what do you want to happen next to them, and that's Artifacts.
Amazing. Yes, I think it's such a great tool. It really is. And I think when it comes to, so this is talking through the physical, right? The physical items that we have at our disposal, but also we have the practical, the documents. And I think that's the other side of this, and where Trustworthy, I think, comes in. And so I'll turn to Nat to talk a little bit about Trustworthy.
Yeah, thanks, Taylor. I mean, I really want to mirror what Heather said. She kind of stole what I was going to say. Thanks, Heather. The tools make legacy planning less about tackling everything at once and more about making steady, confident progress And I think that's a big part of the reason that we took this whole life approach, right? It wasn't just about preparing for the end. It was about how do you keep track of all the important things across your household, across your life, share it with your loved ones and your trusted professionals if you have them, like an accountant or a wealth advisor or a estate planning attorney or all of those folks, and giving them and you a place to collaborate together as things change, as life happens, as we like to say, and kind of a system that is looking proactively for you to keep everything up to date, make sure that you're not getting penalized by the folks that you work with for not being up to date, like not paying your insurance premiums, or you get pulled over and your driver's license is expired, something like that. And that you are prepared for whatever life may throw at you. We just had this great story from a gentleman called Jeremy in Los Angeles who lost his whole home in the Altadena fires earlier this year. And thank God he was a trustworthy member since 2022 and had everything dialed in. So not only could he leave his home quickly, knowing that everything was dialed in and trustworthy, but the recovery process and working with insurance companies, local government, federal government, all the now full-time job he has in recovering his home and his assets is so much easier because he had trustworthy and was able to access all of his paperwork very quickly in the moments that he needed it. So we're so grateful to be part of his journey and others. And these are the moments that you want to be prepared for, but it's not just crisis moments, it's all the day-to-day moments as well. Oh, what's the VIN number to the car? What's my partner's social security number? What I need some information for the kids' school forms. Whatever that situation, I think a lot more of our members are surprised by how quickly they go to Trustworthy to find a little bit of information to get something done on a day-to-day basis. One of the stories I love the most is a gentleman member had a business meeting, forgot his wallet, was able at a bar, was able to show his driver's license on his phone so he could buy a beer for his client in that meeting. So, Trustworthy saves the day in all kinds of ways that you couldn't even imagine, from the ridiculous to the sublime. But those are the big things we think about and want to help families both day to day, in the big moments and the crisis moments. And the one that we hear a lot, great, I love Trustworthy for my household, my family. What about my parents? How do we get ahead of that? One of the ways we deal with that, because of this geographic split in households and families these days, is we have a North American network of Trustworthy certified experts, people who can go work with your parents, help them digitize stuff if they want to do that, help them get it all organized and trustworthy, sit with them either in person or remotely. We have folks all around the country if you're looking for that, or maybe for yourself, if you're just really busy and time starved, like, I don't have time to do this, but I absolutely want things to get set up. We have actual people who will come help you do that and go from 0 to 60 very, very quickly. So that's a little bit about Trustworthy. If you want more information, just go to trustworthy.com. We'd love to help.
Absolutely. So we have just over 10 minutes left. Thanks, Nat. Thank you, Heather, for sharing a little bit more about artifacts and Trustworthy. We have a little bit over 10 minutes left to talk through any questions you might have. I know we have one question already in the Q&A, but if there's any others, please feel free to add them there, and we'll take a couple of them now. But we'll start with Charles has a question and says, when do you give your adult kids access to Trustworthy when you might not want them to see everything right now, like tax returns or bank account balances or stock portfolios?
Yeah, perfectly timed question, Charles, because everyone's sending their kids back to school right now. And for the older kids off to college, it's a real moment, one of those life moments, right? Big moment for parents and kids going off to college. And I think that's a good moment, as we heard Heather talk about with her older teenagers, to sort of loop them in, if you like, to the system. Previously, they're minors, now they're adults. You want to give them some accountability and some responsibility for their own things. So we see lots of parents will give their kids access to what we call their identity stack. So it could be their healthcare directive or power of attorney, certainly, their college related documents, their birth certificate, their digital copy of their driver's license if they have one, Whatever documents are relevant to share. We had one mom, her name's Allison, sending her kid off to college across the country, and she said he's broken a lot of bones in his life, I think, playing sports. And she uploaded all the healthcare information and all the sort of X-rays of his broken bones over the years, and said, I want him to have this when he breaks his next bone, and he can just show the doctor all the film that he has already. So that was a great moment, obviously, for her to loop in her children. But I think that's a good one. There are all kinds of access and trustworthy. One is complete access that you might want to share with your spouse or partner. Limited access, I'm just giving you access to this channel of information if you like. And then what we call legacy access, which is, hey, you can't see anything today, but you know where to go, and here's the process to unlock the system in the event that there's a crisis and you need to do it. If I pass away, or if I'm incapacitated, as Jill pointed out earlier. There's lots of ways to strike that across your system for different members of your household and different members of your ecosystem. We're down to a very granular level of access.
Hey, Nat, could I jump in there as well for a sec?
Yeah.
On the kid front. So for us, 18, once they turn 18, we have that conversation. Now that we're using Trustworthy, they get limited access, and that access increases. One of the eldest of our clan is turning 30, and she will be getting essentially full access at that point, because there's other things that happen when she turns 30 in our family. But our youngest is 14 and going off to boarding school. So for us, it came down to geographic, like where we're now going to have this separation much sooner than we expected. And it's going to be well before, 18. So for us, it came down to what is she going to need when she's no longer living under the same roof as ours. And it sounds silly, but one of the great things is with Trustworthy, we've got the laptop, we've got, she doesn't have a car. We've got the serial number for that laptop. So if something happens and Apple Care needs to know, she's not calling us. She can manage everything herself. So it's that whole, for our perspective, it came down to location, like where is this child going to be and what will they need access to if they can't reach us? Since my husband and I both have really busy jobs and we do travel a bunch. So that was a big deciding factor. It wasn't just age, but also location.
Yeah, great one. And we see generally adult children quite often having a lot of access to elderly parents' accounts, where maybe they're co-managing things, or heavily involved in sort of their parents' household. That's a common occurrence as well. So it really depends on the dynamics of your family and how you choose to work together. But Heather, that's one I had never considered. Younger kids going off to boarding school. Great one.
Yeah. Okay, so our next question is from Jill. Does Trustworthy show access to transactions and checking accounts and or credit cards if needed, a power of attorney should access and step up?
We don't, we don't import transactions. What we can do is we use the Plaid connector, which is an API to connect to financial institutions. So you can pull those in very quickly and a lot at once if you choose to do that. Like I have 5 bank accounts at this institution, you can connect and add those all to Trustworthy. We have had requests to pull in transactions and balances. That's something we're looking at. That starts to cross over into what we think of as PFM, or personal financial management. There are great tools for that, like Monarch and Kubera and others who are very focused on that, doing budgets and classifying transactions, those kinds of things. We're not in that category really. What we wanted to be, and we've touched on this earlier, was the sort of the treasure map. Like where things are, where everything is. Hopefully you've captured everything, and it doesn't have to be Trustworthy. I think Heather said this earlier. It just needs to be a pointer to the storage locker or the safety deposit box or the file folder or some other physical location where something could exist. But we want it to be the pointer. So we haven't pulled in a lot of financial details, but with the sort of wherewithal that you have with the Trustworthy, okay, there is a bank account here, there is a password and login for that bank account. You have this facility to go retrieve those transactions and statements. And lots of folks will choose to store statements in Trustworthy as well. So there can be sort of as much financial recording as you want. But our intent is really to be that sort of treasure map. And there's a cool story here. One of our very early users was a retired Navy captain who had precious metals, I think golden doubloons or something, buried on his property somewhere. And we said, does your family know which, how many paces from the back door and what does the map look like to the precious metals? And he said, yeah, I think they know. But that sort of became a great metaphor for what Trustworthy is. How do you retrieve all the things and the instructions and all the things that you might need to know in case of a crisis? And for your own, one of the big catalysts of Trustworthy was people worrying they're going to lose track of something themselves. There's so many silos and bits and pieces across their household that they were worried that they're going to lose, let alone their family. So it's, that's a long-winded answer to we don't have transactions in Trustworthy today.
Yeah, but still very important context. So we do have one more question. Frank is asking how Trustworthy is positioned right now for stability and growth.
Yeah, great question. We have a strong, vibrant business with lots of incredible loyal customers who talk about Trustworthy every day to their families and peers, and that's one of the ways that we grow is that word of mouth. Also, sort of the viral nature of the product. When you invite people to come in, they discover Trustworthy and ask themselves, why don't I have a Trustworthy account? I have a household, I have kids, I have things, and I have a legacy, right? I have legacy and intent. So we are growing quickly. We have lots of big partners. We also sell to advisors on the other side of the equation, all those professionals that we talked about earlier, who will then turn around and buy Trustworthy for their clients in the tens or hundreds of thousands. We're very well backed financially by some great investors. So hopefully that's a good answer to your question, as much as we can share publicly. But we're in good standing.
Yes, absolutely. Well, if there's no other questions, I'll just give you a couple seconds, but we can move right towards the end here. We have, first of all, let me just say thank you so much to Heather, Jill, and Nat for their time this morning and for sharing their perspectives and their expertise. This is such an important topic when it comes to building and preserving your legacy. And so we're so happy to have facilitated the conversation. So thank you all so much. And with that, we wanted to be able to share that Artifacts and Trustworthy is doing a fun little bundle this month. So if you would like to have a discount for Artifacts or a discount for Trustworthy, either or for Make a Will month, you can scan these QR codes and access that. So thank you so much, Heather and Artifacts team, for participating with that. And then we did want to share some fun update from Trustworthy next month, starting on September 3rd, which Nat mentioned. Some of the best ways to grow Trustworthy is through word of mouth. And so through word of mouth, you can enter for the chance to win a trip to New Zealand. Little fun fact, Nat is from New Zealand. Not that we're biased or anything and think it's the best place in the world, but it is such a wonderful place to escape to, especially during these times that we're living in and you need a little escape from reality. A great place to go is New Zealand. So check back with us on September 3rd to enter for your chance to win.